Good afternoon, everyone. Come and, I think there's still a couple of seats near the front. Be aware if you're sitting near a speaker. When we start playing the film, it may be very loud, so just place yourselves accordingly. My name is Samira Ahmed. I'm a trustee of the Centre for Women's Justice, which is behind this amazing campaign. Welcome to Self-Defence is No Offence. It's the launch of a new campaign on behalf of women who kill. We have two amazing women to talk about the campaign. Harriet Wistrich, who's the CEO and co-founder of the Centre for Women's Justice. Who you'll probably know amongst her many important court cases, helped secure the release of Sally Challen and helped begin to open up a better understanding of coercive control. And Pragna Patel, co-founder of the Southall Black Sisters, another important feminist, who is also instrumental in bringing about some key appeals in the early 90s where this story really begins. And she's also the co-author of a brilliant book called Planet Patriarchy, on sale downstairs. Oh, is it Rahila? Oh God, sorry, it's the other founder of Southall Black Sisters. Sorry. But they're all great feminists and they're all great books. So the plan is to talk a little bit about the launch of the campaign, and then we'll talk more about the background to it, what you can do, and we've got plenty of time for questions. So I'm going to ask Harriet first to tell us a bit about the film.
Hi, can you hear me okay? Yeah. So, delighted actually to screen this film, which we've made in about 4 weeks flat with the help of a couple of camerawomen and director and an editor and pulling everything together. We decided we were going to do this panel, and then we thought we've got to hear some voices from from the women in prison. Now, of course, women who are in prison can't speak directly to you or to us, but they can write their words. So there are some words from some of the women in prison. And then we invited family members and friends of some of the women whose campaigns we're featuring to tell us a little bit about their stories. So you'll see some of the stories of some of the cases that we're fighting around at the moment. As you'll hear more about, I and Pragna have both met right at the beginning of the 1990s, when we both got involved in campaigns around Sarah Thornton, Kiranjit Ahluwalia, and Emma Humphreys, and others later on. And that led me into a career in the law, and over the years I have acted for a number of women who have brought criminal appeals to try and challenge their murder convictions. We did a big piece of research at CWJ more recently that looked at women who kill, and there's quite a lot of material around that. And to do that research, we did some interviews with women in prison, and some of those women asked for legal advice, and then we now receive contact and letters from family members of women who are about to face trial for murder or who have been convicted of murder, asking for our help. And so we have in the last few years collected a lot of cases, and what is quite shocking is the number of women who are clearly victims of domestic abuse, coercive control, or sexual violence, who, in order to survive, have struck back, and their experiences of the criminal justice system just fail on the whole to recognise those experiences. So we wanted to highlight how many cases, and one of the shocking things is how the women who are convicted of murder, how long their sentences are. And we have, the Law Commission are about to look again at the homicide framework, and we are very, very keen to try and bring about real change that will make a difference, because the changes that have been brought about previously have not been very impactful. But I'm going to play the film, we're going to play the film now, and at the end there are quite a lot of captions, and if people can't read it at the back, I'll read through some of those again for you, just so you can hear about some of these shocking cases.
Behind the walls of Britain's prisons, there are many women who have been wrongly convicted of murder, who are serving life sentences. They are vulnerable survivors of male violence or coercive control who were driven to kill by their circumstances.
Hi, my name's Joanne Smith and I'm the mum of Emma Jane Magson, who was convicted of murder in 2016 and was sentenced to 17 years in prison. She absolutely loved James. When he put on the charm, he was very, very charming. When he'd had a drink, he was nasty. She used to ring me up crying. He just put her down. It made her feel worthless, nothing. I remember that day she'd lost the baby, she'd been into hospital, and then she rang me up the next day and she was screaming down the phone. All she wanted was a family. That's all she wanted. All she wanted was James's baby because she thought everything could be all right after she'd had the baby. Through the night she was happy until she met up with James and it all just went wrong. You know, he was jealous, he was being aggressive. Emma at no point that night was the aggressor. Even on CCTV, it doesn't show that Emma was the aggressor that night. He got in the house, he was in the kitchen, and he was strangling her. She was scared, absolutely scared. But when someone's strangling you, what do? You know, you go into this fight or flight mode. She said she didn't realise that she'd stabbed him because he walked away. She says, if I'd have saw blood straight away, she says, I would have done something differently.
What's happened?
He's been stabbed by the looks of it.
We come home, yeah, and he had a fight outside Reynard's, yeah, but he seemed fine.
She didn't see blood. His brother didn't see blood. So if his brother didn't think it was serious, how does anybody expect Emma to think it's serious? But the minute she come to my house, she told me, and I told the police straight away.
I want my boy!
I went to pick my mate from Birmingham Airport. Came, let's say, 45 minutes ago. And I see him lying on the floor.
James!
She had all bruises around her neck, she had bruises on her arm, she had bruises on her leg. I believe this is a miscarriage of justice because on that night, Emma never set out to kill James.
Murder, under English law, is the intention to kill or cause really serious harm. To succeed with self-defense, the accused must demonstrate that they were responding to an imminent attack and that the force used by them was proportionate to the threat faced. Many women fail with this defense because when faced with a violent man, they are likely to use a weapon such as a kitchen knife, and this is judged as disproportionate.
But what the police are really saying is, you can't fight back. You've got to die. Because she's fought back, and now they've twisted it, and now she's been done for murder. When really she was in her own house, defending herself. How's that murder?
A conviction for murder will result in a mandatory life sentence, with the judge setting a minimum number of years before the defendant can be considered for parole.
17 years is such a long time. My granddaughter's lost her mum, I've lost my daughter, and Emma's also lost her life.
I was 49 years old when this happened and a mum of 4 children. The worst part about being in prison is the time lost with my children. The memories I wasn't there to help create. Time which can never be recovered. I have the potential to do great things. I will never get to do those things, nor will I get the chance to be a mother. Having a life sentence, there is no light at the end of the tunnel, mainly because you don't know when that tunnel ends.
That I was in a mental hospital after newly giving birth during my trial. The law, as it stands, does not automatically deem you unfit to plead if you are under section.
I was Blaze's birthing partner at St George's Hospital. It was a 3-day labour. She was in a room that was heavily kind of guarded. She was in handcuffs though, which I found quite distressing. A heavily pregnant person that's literally in labour has handcuffs on. As soon as the baby was born, she was put straight into handcuffs that had no movement at all. They were very tight. She wasn't allowed to hold the baby, but the baby was with her for 5 to 10 minutes. So she gave birth in March and the trial was in the summer. So it was a few months after she had given birth. I can't even comprehend how that must have been for her, and I don't think she was in a good mental state at all, and I don't think she was fit for trial.
He totally ignored the background of the lead-up and painted me to be an ongoing perpetrator of abuse towards the victim, which was entirely not the case. I've recently been raped twice by the victim and had tried to jump in front of a train. Honestly, I just feel let down by the justice system. I've served 3 years in prison and I have 21 left to serve. It feels excessive and it is really hard to get my head around.
Many women who kill their abuser are convicted of murder because jurors and others do not understand why they stay in abusive relationships. They seem to judge them for being complicit in their own abuse.
He smashed up my kitchen, my bedroom. He broke my collarbone, my ribs twice. I never wanted to kill him. I just wanted to survive his attack.
Terrorised me. He called me a slag every single night. I've had scars all over me head where he bashed at me with his phone.
When I stayed with abusive men, I did it because I was scared, conditioned and brainwashed into thinking I had no choice.
In court, consideration is rarely given to the lack of alternatives that many women face in abusive relationships. In fact, coercive control entraps women in such relationships and makes it very difficult for them to leave. And we've learned over time that leaving a violent relationship is often the most perilous moment.
This particular evening, I got a phone call early hours in the morning to go to the police station to pick my grandson up. So we arrived at the police station. So I asked the policeman what had happened. He said Joanne had stabbed John. So I was just in total disbelief. I just couldn't believe it. And he said my mum and John were fighting, and he threatened to stab me. He threatened to shoot me, get me shot. And he said his mum was trying to protect him. And he said it's like a tiger protecting its cubs. If you're in an abusive relationship, you're scared for yourself, and never mind your child. And anyone would protect the child. I feel like the evidence that came out in court, there wasn't a bigger picture of why Joanne got black eyes and It was just dismissed. It was meant like Joanne was like a bully, and she'd went in the kitchen and got a knife and stabbed John. It wasn't about that. It was about she was protecting her son. Her son was threatened on that night, and she was protecting him. I think Joanne in herself, when she phones me, she doesn't want to upset me with a lot of things because, you know, she feels guilty for what what's happened, and she's just, I can tell in her voice sometimes, and sometimes she does get on the phone, she's sobbing, and she says, "Mum, I'm sorry for what happened."
So what I remember is she was in the dock. She was still in shock, state of shock. She just didn't know why she was there. And I was listening to the opening case the day it happened, and so the police give their evidence the next day, and it was just all one-sided by the sounds of it. I mean, she's a young girl. She was trying to get home, and then they're showing the CCTV of it that she was clearly coming across the road from the granddad's house, which was facing the pub. And as she got to her flat, the guy was behind her. That's what I could see on the cameras and that. And it just looked like she was followed. Her bra was ripped off. There was all semen on his clothes, on the bra. It was just ignored. And the way I see it, the police thought, we've got the suspects and that's it. They don't want to do anything on their side. She was defending herself. What more? She pressed the panic alarm in the house. What more could she have done?
After I lost my appeal, I was treated right for a few days. I was overwhelmed by support and finally felt people saw the real me. It was beautiful. I felt hope. I'd wished this for years, and the moment was finally here. It was my glory, but it was just that, a moment.
Now I'm 53 now, so when she gets out, I'm gonna be like 65 or something. But yeah, it's hard.
We've been contacted by many women who've been convicted of murder and serving very long prison sentences. Unfortunately, it is very difficult to appeal a conviction, and one of the only ways you can do this is if you can find fresh evidence. This is what we did in the case of Sally Challen.
I met Richard in 1969. I was 15 and he was 21. He cheated on me right from day one, really, I suppose, but always lied about it. I thought the only way he would love me is if I did exactly what he said. I didn't know what was up or what was down anymore with Richard. I was so controlled that I just couldn't sort of speak freely. I wasn't in the sane mind when I did it, and I recognise that now. But I thought at the time, I think this was the only way I could get peace. Yeah. Then in about 2012, I was contacted by my brother Terence, who said that my niece had found a lawyer called Harriet Wistrich. And Harriet came to see me.
In 2018, Sally had her appeal, and the appeal was allowed. Her case was then sent to retrial, but before the trial took place, the Crown Prosecution Service accepted her plea to manslaughter, and she was freed.
I don't understand why judges give such harsh sentences to women. There were so many women imprisoned where I was who'd come up to me and say, "Oh my God, I hope you get your appeal. It's going to open the doors for us."
Despite the success of Sally's appeal, many abused women are still being convicted of murder. We need to change not only the law and the criminal justice system, but wider understanding of how women become entrapped in abusive relationships.
I'm still here, I'm still fighting, but I shouldn't be behind bars for surviving.
The Centre for Women's Justice is documenting cases of women who may be wrongly convicted of murder and is helping many of them to explore grounds for appeal. They need your support. Join the campaign for justice for women. You can write to women in prison, help raise awareness, and raise money for their appeals.
I want fairness. I want the truth to be heard. Please stand with me.
So Camilla, were you abused?
No comment.
Killing me every day. I don't have the heart to live far away from my babies. 6 years already. Where is justice? Where are my rights? Where is the truth in the battle we fight? It's been so long. I have been waiting for you. But you were a man of dignity. However you prefer to lie and destroy everything. You took everything away from me. Where is justice? Where are my rights? Where is the truth in the battle we fight? It's been so long. I have been waiting for you. I've been waiting for you, waiting for you. Come on and tell the truth. I've been waiting for you, waiting for you. Got no more life to lose. I've been waiting for you, waiting for you to come on and say the truth. I've been waiting for you, waiting for you. Tell me what you're gonna do. I surrender to your will. I have faith in your plan to guide me through.
Thank you so much for making that film. It's remarkably disturbing, the number of these women who have such strong evidence of abuse and yet are given such, not just murder convictions, but such lengthy minimum terms. Can we take us back to the beginning of this journey? Or do you want to start by just reading out some of the information at the back? Were women at the back able to read that rolling set of names? No. Would you mind doing it, Harriet? I think it's worth just remembering these cases. Thank you.
Sorry, it might take a wee while, but it's just... Yes. Yeah. So I think it's quite important just to hear all these cases. By the way, that music at the end, which I think is really powerful, was made in prison with one of the women, Camilla Ahmed, singing on it. Amazing talent. So it's another, well, hopefully not a lost talent because it's here, but. And she comes up first. So we just listed a number of names and very brief circumstances. So if you bear with me, I'll just read through those. These are some of the women CWJ, Centre for Women's Justice, are supporting. all victims of male violence and all convicted of murder. So Camilla Ahmed, 24-year-old, convicted in 2023, minimum sentence. So you get a life sentence for murder, minimum sentence 23 years. Stabbed her abusive partner during a violent argument. On arrest, her face was heavily bruised and her hands were skinned from trying to hold onto the carpet as her 6'2" boyfriend pulled her 4'7" body. Her 6'2" boyfriend pulled her 4'7" body. She had a growth condition along the floor during an attack. Then Lee Rose Cheng, 25 years old, conviction 2023, minimum sentence 16 years. Lee Rose was followed home from a pub by an older man. She stabbed him with a kitchen knife and activated a panic alarm in her flat. When police arrived, she was half naked, injured and distressed. She believed she was spiked and raped. Jolan Moran, 42 years old, convicted in 2023, minimum sentence 18 years. Killed her abusive boy partner with a single stab wound after he threatened to have her 14-year-old son killed. Natalie Bennett, age 47 years old, convicted 2023, minimum sentence 18 years, killed her abusive partner after he violently attacked her. Evidence of his abuse included a large clump of hair found on the floor that he'd ripped from her scalp. Emma Jane Magson, 23 years old, conviction 2016, minimum sentence 17 years, killed her abusive partner with a single stab wound. He was strangling her at the time. Amanda O'Shaughnessy, 29 years old, convicted 2015, killed her abusive partner with a single stab wound. He was strangling her at the time. Sonia Blenkiron, 43 years old, convicted 2023, minimum sentence 15 years. Caroline Loweth, 49 years old, convicted 2014, minimum sentence 17 years, killed her abusive partner with a single stab wound, had previously suffered a serious head injury. Lindsay Gabriel, 31 years old, convicted 2019, minimum sentence 14 years, killed her abusive partner with a single stab wound. Sharon Edwards, 42 years old, year convicted 2016, minimum sentence, computer's not working. Plaster, which won't let me. I don't think it needs my fingers. Let me just try that. Yeah. Kills her abusive partner with a single stab wound. Blaze Wallace, 27 years old, year convicted 2023, minimum sentence 24 years, killed her abusive partner with a single stab wound. Martina Oganovska, 18 years old, year convicted 2018, minimum sentence 17 years, killed a man she was dating with a single stab wound as he was attempting to sexually assault her. Ellie Wayne, convicted, 18 years old, convicted 2020, minimum sentence 17 years, killed her violent partner with a single stab wound to the chest. Abigail White, 24 years old, convicted 2022, minimum sentence 18 years, killed her controlling partner by stabbing him once in the chest. Lisa Glover, 38 years old, convicted 2014, minimum sentence 14 years, killed her partner who was strangling her at the time with a single stab wound.
Thank you for reading that list. Actually, I want to start by asking, has Sally Challen's case not changed anything, do you think, in the way that judges are looking at these?
I think there is a bit of learning from Sally Challen's case, which brought in the coercive and controlling behaviour, greater understanding, but I think it really hasn't translated. And whilst there is a little bit of guidance for judges, whilst some lawyers have picked up on it, I think it really shows, and what we see again and again with all these cases, and you'll notice that most of those are very recent cases from 2023, is that jurors completely don't, it's the same issue. They think these women, there's a loss of a life, these women stayed with these men, and they just don't understand the dynamics of coercive and controlling behaviour.
The other thing that emerged, and I was thinking particularly of the case of the young woman who was followed home by a stranger and hit the panic alarm button in her house because she was raped and had her drink spiked, is what do we know about the way the police are handling the evidence? I'm fascinated to know why there were no successful grounds for appeal in her case.
Again, you have to. The case was well run originally, and if a lot of things have been put forward in evidence but the jury don't buy it, then it's very difficult to find an appeal. In that case, there was an appeal run because of the way in which the court summarised loss of control. But this is the defence that was brought in. To replace provocation. It was supposed to recognise fear of serious violence, but the way in which that law is run and the way it's interpreted, it's not recognising the circumstances. One of the issues in Lee Rose Cheng's case, and in many of the cases we see, is that women don't remember exactly what happened, and when they don't remember, sometimes they try to provide an explanation, and sometimes they say things which aren't necessarily very consistent. But if they don't remember, people think it's suspicious that they're making it up. I mean, it is well documented that's many of the women we've worked with just simply have got a block, whether it's traumatic amnesia or whether they've been spiked, which may have been the case in her case. If they can't remember, they can't remember. Somehow that's seen as a problem.
Pragna, what are your thoughts on looking at the present from the experience of the past, given how many cases you covered back in the early 90s?
It seems like it's like with a lot of things, it's like we moved 10 steps forward in the 90s and we're now 100 steps backwards. And it's like everything else, all the gains that we have made as women, as feminists, or as progressives, seriously under threat or gone backwards. So I think that there is a wider issue here. One of the things that really struck me about those amazing, those tragic cases is the length of their sentences. The length of their sentences range, and I've written it down, from 16 years, 17 years to 22 years. And
24, I think.
24 years. In the 80s and 90s, when we worked on the cases of women like Sarah Thornton, Kiranjit, Ahluwalia, Emma Humphreys, the average, and they were miscarriages of justice, and we'll go into more about those cases later, but the average minimum sentence, the length of the average minimum sentence was about 12 years, 13 years. So what we're seeing here is some kind of a pattern of intense criminalization of women and a misogyny that is really deep. And I think it chimes with a wider political law and order agenda. And that is part of the kind of drift that we have seen to the right, when actually what's happening are successive governments think they can deal with social issues through crime and law and order, to criminalize people and to clamp down in a way that's really dangerous. And women are getting swept up in it, and even more so because of the misogyny that's prevalent throughout. So I think that's one of the key things that this is showing us, is that there is this intense criminalization of women going on. And I see that not just in relation to these dramatic cases that result in the deaths, women who end up killing in desperate circumstances, but we see it in daily cases of women who are reporting domestic abuse and find that they are instead arrested, detained, convicted, partly because perpetrators are making counter-allegations, and those counter-allegations are being prioritised.
Yeah. Sorry, can you hear me okay? Yeah. Can I just make a point about sentencing, which is there is understandably a campaign by many of the families of women who've been murdered by men. And what this film doesn't highlight, but most women who are killed by men, the men are the abusers as opposed to they are. Whereas in all these cases, the women are the victims of abuse, but they've killed to survive. But there is understandably, campaigns by those who have been bereaved in such circumstances to want longer sentences, and also who've been killed in other circumstances. There was a huge campaign around knife crime, which led to an increase in the tariff if you take a knife to a scene. Now, this is not so much around domestic homicide cases. It's actually around, kind of kids in gangs and stuff like that. And there is something called Schedule 21, which sets the minimum term, and that the average minimum term is supposed to be 15 years for a murder. So if you get, you can get more than 15 years if there are aggravating circumstances, less than 15 years if there are mitigating circumstances. 2 cases in that roll call that had 14 years, and other cases where average was at 17, 18 years, and some more. Now, the bringing the knife to the scene has added 10 years on, so you start at 25 years. There is a campaign, I feel massive sympathy for these women, two women who lost their daughters, where they were stabbed in the house, and they got shorter sentences, and they're saying that the tariff for using a knife at home should be the same as one bringing to the scene. Now, what that would mean is that, as you saw in this case, virtually every single case was a single stab wound, because the knife is the thing that you go for if you're being attacked in the home. So, we have to find a way to work together with those families and understand those circumstances, but not to have these mandatory sentencing, which is just so backfired on women, and that is why the sentences have gone up and up and up.
Again, thinking very practically, the change in the law around non-fatal strangulation, there's no way in which that is potentially helping change attitudes towards the fact that so many of these women were being strangled at the time they reached for a knife.
I think that's also a very striking feature in many of the cases. I think that's something we have to build on. There is a growing understanding about strangulation now, and the way in which abusers use strangulation as a threat, as something to really frighten women so they don't strike back. There is a growing understanding, but it isn't really translated into these cases yet.
Pragna, you mentioned these early cases from the 90s, like Sarah Thornton, Emma Humphreys, Kiranjit, Ahluwalia, and the fact that the minimum tariffs given for those murder convictions tended to be lower. Can I ask what kind of campaigning you had to do then, and how far there are lessons from then for now? Because you said we've gone so much further back.
Well, it seems to me like we're rehearsing the same arguments now that we did back then. Back then, the idea of women who kill in circumstances of coercive control and domestic abuse just wasn't understood. It wasn't understood at all. And as feminists, we were grappling with it. In my situation, for instance, I had, until the point of Kiranjit Ahluwalia's case, which was in 1990, always worked with families where the women had been killed by abusive men. And so we were used to campaigning around cases of women who'd been killed by abusive men, and then those campaigns largely revolved around ensuring that the perpetrators were held accountable in court. And what we were seeing in court was that the perpetrators were able to get very lenient, sentencing, because they could argue that they were the actual victims of nagging and, adulterous affairs and all sorts of things, and generally able to attract sympathy. And so they were absolutely being treated leniently in situations where they killed as a result of prolonged abusive behaviours on their part. Then comes along a case like that of Kiranjit Ahluwalia, an Asian woman who had endured abuse for 10 years in her marriage, and who then killed her husband as a result of that abuse. she could not leave him. She had taken out a restraining order against him, but she felt under huge pressure, particularly cultural pressure and religious pressure, to remain in her marriage. She had no support, she did not know where to go, and in desperation, she killed him by setting fire to him.
So it was a shocking death.
It was a shocking death. She didn't mean to kill him. She actually threw petrol on his feet while he slept. And her intention was that if she threw petrol on his feet, he wouldn't be able to run after her. However, of course, it was a very dangerous act and it did result in his death. And then she was convicted of his murder, a very short trial with lawyers that didn't understand domestic abuse at all, didn't put forward that context very well in court, and the juries just convicted her of murder. And that's when we entered the scene as Southall Black Sisters and decided to take up this case. And we had to grapple with the fact that she was a woman who killed. How do you explain that to the public? And then how do you explain to the public that these women deserve to be understood in the context of their experiences of abuse and not see that as a license to kill? And it was a real learning lesson for us, because we knew that we had to reopen her case, find new lawyers, find new grounds to appeal her conviction on the basis that there'd been a miscarriage of justice. And that's the other thing I want to say. Miscarriages of justice until that point only ever applied to men in the context of political violence. We were the first ones to start using it to talk around about women who kill and who are, convicted. And so we knew that it wasn't enough to find new grounds in terms of her mounting a legal appeal. And that was a learning lesson in itself, because it showed us just how the law constructs women and is biased against women. And the laws of homicide and the defense laws of provocation and self-defense just are weighed against women. They are constructed around male behavior. But we also understood that it wasn't going to be enough to challenge legally that we needed a political campaign. And if we were going to put pressure on the courts to do the right thing, to deliver the justice that she and other women deserved, we knew that we needed to mount a major political campaign and change the cultural attitudes around domestic abuse and the way women are seen. So in a way, those lessons about the need to use the law and coming up against obstacles in the law itself, which is still the issue now. And secondly, the need to mount effective feminist campaigns. And lo and behold, here we are again. And in the meantime, the kind of changes we have made through the law, we got rid of the law of provocation, the law was replaced by the loss of self-control, and as some of these cases show, they're not working. Juries don't buy it. And sentences are higher. And also, the self-defense law isn't changed. It's not changed at all. It's still around this idea that, you need to show that you're responding and defending yourself in relation to an imminent threat and proportionately. And these things have not changed. So in a way, the small understandings, the small cultural shifts that we saw in understanding have changed a bit, but in the meantime, there are other forces at play that have taken us backwards.
So can I ask, what are the key things that you're hoping this campaign is going to target? It's obviously partly public attitude, but it seems to be also partly the way the criminal justice system is treating women who are caught up in these tragic circumstances.
Yeah, I think so many things need to change. One of the reasons we decided to launch the campaign now is because the Law Commission which is a body that the government sometimes asks to look at different issues in law, and they undertake these long consultations. make recommendations for changes in the law, and sometimes those are then turned into reforms to the law. So if you know, back in, what's ironic actually is back in the early 2000s, the government conducted this whole survey into the homicide offences. We both contributed to that. Oh, sorry. The Law Commission, is that better? The Law Commission did this whole review of the homicide laws in the early 2000s, made some recommendations. The government accepted some of the recommendations, but not all of them. And the main one was to get rid of the provocation defence, which was a defence that was very much excusing men who kill and wasn't working for women. And they brought in this defence of loss of control. But loss of control was designed to recognise those circumstances where someone might kill out of fear of serious violence. However, research since that law was brought in 2009 is that actually women are still being discriminated against. Are less likely to succeed with loss of control. There's a really interesting piece of research that looked at a load of cases than men. So I think what we've learned is that it's, we do need changes to the law, but we need changes in practice. We need changes in understanding. We need a way in which, if these cases are going to be tried, that they are tried with an understanding and with a really good explication of entrapment and coercive control, because it's only through understanding that that potentially, once you understand it, once you get it, you get it. But juries don't. And so one thing we want, for example, is for the courts to admit, at the moment, they only admit like psychiatric evidence as expert evidence. And what we need is evidence from experts, or we need a way of representing to jurors what the dynamics of a coercive and controlling relationship, so people can understand.
Thank you. Pragna, you want to add something?
I just wanted to come in and say I think the Law Commission review into homicide laws offers us a unique opportunity to rethink this. And actually, one of the things I'm really attracted by is the idea of introducing a law of social entrapment. Because I actually,
Can you explain that, a law of social entrapment?
Yes. So, as Harriet says, that even up till now, even as a result of the Kiranjit, Ahluwalia, Emma Humphreys and all those cases, you usually, the only evidence you can admit in court is psychiatric evidence. It's, evidence about the impact of the abuse on women, and to somehow show that kind of, affected their minds and they did what they did. So it's kind of medicalizing women in major ways. And what we have and one of the consequences of our campaigning in the 80s and 90s is we brought in this concept which we hated, the battered women syndrome, which was again about, how does it impact on women's minds, and it medicalizes women. Now that's kind of carried on, and we've never been able to introduce other evidence. So for example, with a lot of Black and minoritized women who are unable to even disclose abuse, therefore have no contemporary evidence to show that they are victims of abuse. So we've been arguing that some kind of cultural evidence to explain the kind of real barriers that Black and minoritized women face in their families, in their communities, religious constraints, cultural constraints, they impact on whether women whether women see that they have other alternatives and options. We've never been able to introduce cultural evidence because the courts don't like it. In fact, in many of the cases, we have this ludicrous situation where the courts say, the judges say, if we need cultural evidence, we'll ask the families to talk about it. And the families are not objective enough, nor can they offer a gendered analysis of that culture. And so inevitably, or they say, the juries can use their common sense, And so we've never been able to introduce experts who can show how cultural those constraints are. We've never been able to introduce evidence that says, actually, you know what, there are structural inequalities that we need to take into account. The fact that when women do go to agencies, they're failed again and again and again. That the fact that they live in poverty, are dependent financially on their abusers, therefore did not think that they had a way out of that abuse. So the structural factors, the poverty, the socio-economic conditions, the cultural conditions, all of these, we think, will make it, it's more likely, perhaps, if we can argue it well, that the social entrapment model, which moves away from medicalizing women to understanding how inequality, gender inequality, is socially constructed, to bring that into court. And that's why I say that we really have an opportunity to try and rethink this altogether.
I was wondering about the political environment. Pragna was talking earlier about that whole use of the criminal justice system to send out a message about being tough on things, but also the reality of the law around knife crime. What sense do you get of the political climate in which this campaign is being launched? Are there quarters where there seems to be more understanding of potential sympathy?
Well, we also do work around criminalisation of survivors more broadly, not just because obviously there's not that many women who end up killing, but many women end up being criminalised in different ways for committing offences, or sometimes not for committing offences, but for being set up by controlling partners to appear to have committed an offence. This is a real problem, and we've been campaigning also for changes in the law, not just around homicide, but around for example, the defence of duress, which does not work at all for women who are coerced into offending, and so on. What's one of the many hugely disappointing things about our current government, for whom we had some hope originally, was that when they were in opposition, they were very supportive of lots of changes. Now they're in power, suddenly they're opposing them all. And I don't even understand it, because actually they've set up, one of the first things they did was set up a Women's Justice Board. Shabana Mahmood, who was the Lord Chancellor, basically made this speech which recognised exactly, she talked about a constituent who'd been criminalised and said, we see, nearly, the official figures are now over 70% of women in prison are victims of domestic abuse. And so they recognise that. And they are desperate to try and empty the prisons because they're overcrowded. So that, and it does, it actually will save them money. It's not even there's an economic reason not to bring in these changes, because it saves them money, not to criminalise women. But I'm really now at a loss as to why they're so resistant, except they're fearful of being accused of being soft on crime, I guess.
I'm about to open it up to questions from the floor. I had one other question, which is the police behaviour. We know there are all kinds of issues with the police and the criminal justice system. But I remember covering a case where they were boasting about, oh, look, we've convicted this woman of domestic violence. And I had to interview the partner. And then it subsequently turned out that, of course, she had been abused by him, and yet she was the one who ended up with the conviction. Can I ask a bit about what sense you get of how far the police are getting to grips with the scale of what the problem is?
Who's watched Panorama lately?
I know.
Who's watched it? That is the most depressing and most shocking, and we shouldn't be shocked, because everybody has been complaining about police, institutionalized misogyny, institutionalized racism, institutionalized corruption, and nothing has changed. And that is really, really depressing. And the sense you get, actually, the reason why I think it's got worse is because I think generally we're seeing an ascendant culture of misogyny. We really are. We can't divorce this question from the wider ways in which we see, an incel movement. We see misogyny online. We see that kind of Andrew Tate kind of, generation of a culture that is so women-hating. And I think that there is something about politically being in a climate where we have gone backwards, where the kind of feminist arguments that we were making in the 80s and 90s, which were so hopeful, we are having to remake again. And it is part of this wider drift towards authoritarianism that is also about, that also conveys this idea again about traditional family values, about strict gender roles of men and women, and so on. I think all of that feeds into this. And so you have this kind of license that people have to be racist, to be misogynist, to be open about it and to turn it into a virtue. How else can you explain the way the police behave when there is a report of domestic abuse and they say, oh, well, she would say that. We thought we'd won that argument in the 70s and 80s. And here we are again. And that's why I say that I think there is a wider political climate that we're in that is absolutely chilling, because whereas we were hopeful in the 80s and 90s, we're now feeling like, we have to defend everything and reclaim the arguments and revisit those arguments and remake them all over again.
Harriet, any comments on the police issue in this? And I take your point, Pragna, but I think we also have to be practical. And I've met some amazing police officers over the years, male and female, who take the issue seriously. So, practically, is there a sense that some of them, know what's required?
I think, there are the police officers who do understand the issue. And I know, we at Centre for Women's Justice, we do a lot of work around police perpetrated abuse. We do a lot of work around criminalisation and all the terrible things.
We're about to do the panel on spy cops.
And spy cops next, yeah. So we see all the worst. But what's interesting is that we also hear from women in the police who say, keep on doing it, keep on saying this, because they are actually fighting. There are some people who join the police unbelievably and stay in the police unbelievably because they think they can do a good job. And they're struggling against this horrendous culture, which we saw, for those of you who saw the Panorama programme a couple of weeks ago. But they are out there, and obviously, we need to sort of build some support for them to be able to do their jobs as well.
Right, let's take some questions from the floor. If you could raise your hand, I could ask you to keep the questions nice and concise. We're going to take one of the microphones from here. And have you got another one? Where's the other microphone at the moment? You have two? Just the one? All right, well, it's just you, right. Let's take the one at the front first, and then we'll work our way down the middle of the room. Could I ask you to keep it nice and concise? Thanks.
So someone on the panel mentioned about a cluster of cases in the early 2020s about some of the women in the film, and it reminded me of the cluster of cases of women being criminalised for having an abortion. So I just wonder whether there's some policy making going on in the civil service, or because we tend to focus on how the courts behave, but is there something higher up that's going on?
Thank you. Right, well, you want to take that one first, Harriet, and then could you put the hands up to the middle? So there's the person with the glasses and the black t-shirt in the middle table there. Yeah, two hands up there. Next.
It's true that this recent phenomenon of women being, which I wasn't completely unaware of, that women were being sent to prison for having late abortions, and and then there was a very shocking revelation about police guidance about child deaths, which included abortions, and how they are supposed to investigate these cases. So I think I don't know quite where all these things come from. In relation to the reforms around duress and why the government have backtracked, it feels to me like they're getting some advice from somewhere within the civil service or the defense, the legal advice, which is telling them they mustn't do it. But I don't know. We're trying to get to the bottom of it.
Thank you. Right, the question with the microphone there. Yes, hello.
Hi. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, hold it nice and close.
Okay. I just wondered, I appreciate this might sound a bit simplistic, but I can think of
Just hold it close to you. No, just hold the microphone close to your mouth. That's it,
like
perfect,
that.
yeah.
Right. So I can just think of so many examples of women where the men have been, I mean, they serve less than like 10 years a lot of the time. Is that because that they're normally charged with manslaughter as opposed to murder? Or how do they not end up with those minimum massive sentences?
Yeah, no, well, I was thinking of the case of the man who strangled his wife 5 days into lockdown, and it was blamed on, obviously he couldn't cope with lockdown after 5 days, and he got done for manslaughter only. Can we keep hands up for the next question, and while Harriet or Pragna takes that one, we'll go to the lady on the right there with the red scarf. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think now, if you're convicted of murder, you're unlikely to get a sentence less than 13 years, minimum term. But so probably those that are under 10 years will be manslaughter cases. So if they one of the things we've seen, which I also think needs to change, is the readiness with which the Crown Prosecution Service seem to offer pleas to sometimes to men who are under stress and are elderly or living in difficult situations, to plead to a manslaughter offence. And once they pleaded, then they all get a much shorter sentence.
It's one of the reasons there's so much feminist anxiety about the assisted dying law, I think. Right, yes.
I've got two.
Can you make it one question and nice and concise, because we want to get around the room?
All right.
Thank you.
Well, the other one was about comparable statistics, so I won't ask that because you've kind of done it already. The other one is about the CPS, because it seems that I've heard that the CPS now, or the police are always claiming that the reason they don't prosecute rape cases anymore is CPS advises them against it and says don't do it. So, I mean, that's where I see a ton more misogyny in the CPS service, which would also be part
So is that your question? Is it
is that Harriet's idea too, and
Thank you.
advice too, obviously?
Yeah, how far is this an issue with the CPS, do you think?
I mean, they throw these things back and forwards to each other. So the CPS blame the police blame the CPS. The stuff about rape, we did a lot of work and did a big legal case around the CPS changing their approach and charging less, and so the police were building these cases, CPS were not charging, and then it goes the other way.
Yeah, the momentum
but I think
falls away.
I mean, at the moment the new DPP seems to be a bit open to listening to stuff. So we are trying. One of the things we're also working around is trying to get them to look at much more, because they do have policies online about looking at the coercive circumstances in which somebody offends. It's just, it's not always translated into reality, and so we've got some ideas as well about
Thank
that.
you. Hands up. Right. Can we start to come across then? Yes. The person with the black hair and the glasses, and then the lady behind with the longer hair. We'll take those two next. Hello. And as I say, hold the microphone nice and close to your lips, and we'll hear you.
Thank you. Is this loud enough? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Quickly, the cases of strangulation, death by single stab wound, obvious strangulation marks on neck, I would imagine. Help me understand what's going on in the courts here. Do they not see strangulation as an imminent threat to life? What is the reasoning that the courts are giving for not counting that evidence?
Thank you. Harriet.
Sometimes it's because it's just not explored properly by the defence lawyers. In the Fry Martin case, which was another case we did after Sally Challen, which we did successfully plead, she said exactly that. She was being strangled at the time. The defence barristers, they didn't get evidence to really support that, and when she first came into custody, she was in denial about the fact that she'd stabbed him, and so she didn't give an account, and so she wasn't properly medically examined until eventually she did give an account. But the barristers formally failed to admit any evidence of bruising to her neck. So subsequently at her retrial, we obtained a pathologist report which supported her claim of strangulation. So there are kind of, we've obviously had to represent stuff very simply here, and there are always reasons why things don't come across, but often that it may be poor representation, it may be interpretation. There are all different reasons why it
But
doesn't
in
come
a
across.
system which is underfunded, then these errors are much more likely to happen, aren't they? Thank you. Right, there was the lady just at the same table. Yes, you've got the microphone, go for it.
Hiya, it's a bit similar. I was just wondering, like, when you're incapacitated by extreme violence and you're disproportionately smaller than the person, what would be considered a proportionate response if you're able to actually give a proportionate response?
I know, I find this such a great question. When you were talking about loss of self-control, it's like, it seems to be the one thing you do when you know that you're facing being murdered is to have enough self-control to grab the knife, and that's the reason why these women are being convicted, because you can't prove the loss of self-control. Sorry, anyway, I wasn't trying to answer the question on behalf of the lady. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, my thought is that the crux of the matter is the disparity between men and women in terms of physical strength. The disparities between men and women in terms of physical strength. And the laws, whether it's self-defense or whether it's loss of self-control, have not been able to deal with this. They've just not been able to deal with the idea that women only ever kill when their perpetrators are incapacitated somehow, because that's the only way that they can retaliate, even in self-defense. I'm also struck, I know we talked about strangulation in single stab wounds, but I have to say that of all the black minority, the Asian women particularly, that I have cases that I've worked around where they've killed, they've used fire or poison. Now, you imagine how hostile the courts are going to be to the use of those kinds of what I would classify as weapons in terms of trying to retaliate, in self-defense or to preserve themselves. So I think this whole, it stems back into this idea that somehow in front of the law, men and women are equal. And that's all they see, and that's a kind of gender neutrality that is built into the law.
Yeah, that works against women. Right, yes, what have you, who else is running? Yes.
Can I just
Yes,
add
please.
one other point as well?
Very, very, oh sorry, Harriet, it was you. I thought it was no, you can't, Harriet. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I mean, the point really is that if you use a weapon, it's regarded as an aggravating feature. So that's why all the sentences tend to be over the 15-year average, because they've used a weapon. But, and so if a man strangles somebody to death, it's only really men that strangle someone to death. That's that they're not using a weapon. So that's somehow, more proportionate than somebody who uses a knife, because that's the only way they can survive.
Right, sorry, where's the microphone got to? Yes.
I'm over here.
Yes, go for it.
I have a philosophy of law question. I want to hear your thoughts on a self-defense strategy where women have the burden of proving imminence based in that structuralist analysis of male violence you had both provided
Sorry,
earlier.
For me as the non-philosophy student, could you just clarify what you mean?
Just an expansive definition of imminence that can
Thank
incorporate.
You. Thank you.
Yeah.
Come on, one of you has to answer it.
That's quite complicated. Yeah, I mean, I think you have to understand the surrounding circumstances, don't you? Also, if you're understanding that somebody is very, very fearful, and they know that if they respond, they're going to come out worse, or be killed themselves, then they have to pause. They have to think about it. They have to find a way to come out of it. So I think that is one of the problems around it.
There's more evidence that's been emerging about the damage, the brain damage that's inflicted very, very quickly with strangulation. And the government has even, made a thing about outlawing it in pornography. And I just wonder if that is one small way in which we could start to build something against these convictions.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really interesting point, and that one really phenomenal statistic actually we've heard is how many women in prison have head injuries, either from physically being hit by domestic abuse or possibly a combination of trauma as well as mental trauma as well as which affects their memory, and so that affects their the way in which they provide evidence, and or you know, it's another feature. So I think understanding that. But strangulation also, we now have a greater understanding about the, you know, if somebody's been strangled several times, they may have a brain injury as a result of that, because it you know, physiologically we understand what the deprivation of oxygen could do.
Thank you. Right, where's the microphone now? Hello, yes. Can we keep going further back? Is anyone else near the back of the room there? No? Right, let's go to the side. There's the hand over here, the lady with the purple jacket and t-shirt, yes. Thank you.
I'm just wondering whether anybody's considered the possibility of jury prejudice. It wasn't concerned with the murder case, but it was certainly somebody I heard in a pub boasting about the fact that he'd been on a jury which concerned domestic abuse. And he said that he was able to convince people that it wasn't really abuse because everybody he knew slapped their wives.
I'm so sorry that you heard that. Yeah, so, I mean, this is the reality. There was that Channel 4 show, wasn't there, with the two different juries doing a murder trial. And you could see the power of a, well, I was going to say a coercive male on the jury to change opinions. Your thoughts on the jury side of things?
There were two Channel 4 programmes, one a couple of years ago, which looked at a case of a man who killed a woman who'd succeeded with the loss of control defence when he just lost it, and I think he strangled her. And then of a woman, and actually the case it was based on is Emma Jane Magson, which we heard about in this film. And it was quite, that was very recently screened, and it was quite fascinating watching how the jury was so divided, and how some of them were, you know, there were some, and what was quite interesting actually was some of the people had experience of domestic abuse themselves, and were either that made them very sympathetic to her, or it made them unsympathetic, because it was sort of like, well, I was a victim of domestic abuse, I would have never killed him, that sort of attitude. But what was really striking at the end was how those jurors just felt a terrible responsibility about trying to come up with the right verdict, and felt ill-equipped actually to make such a momentous decision.
I sometimes wonder if they need to have that concept of beyond reasonable doubt explained. It's not beyond all doubt, beyond reasonable. I know that Harriet, Pragna, there are some specific demands that go with this campaign, so could you tell us a bit about them?
Yeah, I mean, here's just a few things you can do, just so we don't end on a really bleak note. We are trying to build up support, and if you're interested in supporting the campaign, you know, have a look at the Centre for Women's Justice website, and we, you know, some of the women would really appreciate contact and writing. So we've got some of the women who have said yes, they'd like to receive correspondence, and we know that some of the women we supported back in the 90s found that really helpful. So that's one thing you can do. And what we learnt from our campaigning in the 90s is that, you know, if a case does get to the appeal court, you know, come and join the protest, make a noise about these cases, so that it kind of, you know, it's those cases that have a chance of succeeding at appeal, because it's that, you know, once you shine, you know, like with the Sally Challen case, once that is exposed to the public, you know, you know, I think the judges are kind of a bit more under manners about coming to their decision. Not always, but it can help. And also just to plug, so we're looking at some criminal appeals for some of these cases. One of the difficulties is that there's very little funding, and we don't currently have legal aid for these cases. So we've set up a fighting fund. We're trying to raise money, and this week we're part of something called the Big Give campaign. So if you're able to just put some money into the Big Give campaign this week before next Wednesday, it's doubled. It's doubled. So we're trying to create some money so we can get some expert reports done and pay for those, which will help fight those appeals.
And remind people what to search for when they want to give to this Big give appeal. Nick.
Got the QR code somewhere. No.
We'll put up the QR code in the meantime while we... I also wondered about the role of media coverage, because when you talk about people potentially coming to appeal hearings, helping make a big noise, a big part of it is also getting coverage, and I know that both of you have spoken to the media over the years. Can you tell me a bit about what difference that's made, the challenges of getting the media to understand what's really going on?
I think media coverage is absolutely essential. It's absolutely key to create that momentum of pressure that's needed, particularly when cases are getting to appeal, and we need to ensure that judges are aware that there is huge interest in these cases. What are the challenges of getting the media? I don't know, Harriet. But
in the past, one could argue that some of these women were portrayed in quite a hostile way. Has that changed?
Well, they were portrayed in a hostile way, depending on which media it was. But there were also very good journalists that we used to turn to really provide a very sympathetic coverage. And I'm thinking, particularly in the Kiranjit Ahluwalia, and then this other woman whose case we dealt with, which is Zora Shah. Duncan Campbell was one of them. I don't know if you remember.
Yes, I knew him very well. He was my mentor when I worked at the Guardian. Yeah.
He was wonderful.
Yeah, he died quite recently.
And I don't know, Harriet, if you have relationships like that, but we were able to build this relationship with amazing journalists like that. And he would be very sympathetic, and he would cover the stories, he would show it to you to check that it was all okay and put it out. And it's those kinds of relationships that you need to build with journalists to ensure that the portrayals are accurate and sympathetic and not sensational.
But they also have to get the airtime or the pages to print these stories.
Yeah, I mean, we do have relationships with quite a lot of good journalists. Duncan Campbell's very sadly missed because he was fabulous on this particular issue as well as others. But we do have quite a lot of support. I mean, part of the problem I think is the way in which media coverage has got so kind of all over the place. So it's once you just work with a couple of one newspaper, one BBC, and you get it out there. It seems to be much harder, so much more diverse. There are some documentaries. There's a documentary being made about one of the cases we worked with on Stacey Hyde case. There's some other documentaries and TV programs coming up, but it's sort of trying to make sure it reaches people, and we're kind of engaging where we can with the media just to get the stories out. But obviously there are some unsympathetic kind of pieces being made as well. Like, what was that one we got? Caller makes 99, what was it? Killer makes a call or something. Those sorts of things. Or murdered by my wife, that kind of thing.
Interesting byline on that story. We've got time for a couple more questions. Yes, take one of these two at the front, I think, and then we'll see if we have time for more. Thank you. Hold it nice and close.
I'm keen to leave here with as many strategies as possible. And this conference was opened by a great police and crime commissioner. And we many of us now have not just female but feminist commissioners. Any advice on what might be useful for us to try and do in terms of a strategy?
Thank you.
I think we'll put our 10-point plan that we're working on at the moment on our website of things. But yeah, I mean, I think where you've got like a sympathetic police and crime commissioner, or you've got someone else, just talk to them and lobby them, and we'll see what we can do to suggest some ideas as well.
In terms of practical things that everyone can do, apart from supporting the campaign in all the ways that Harriet said, is actually, if you are on the front line, or if you are involved in any shape or form in supporting women who are subject to domestic abuse, document it. Please document, their accounts, help them to photographs, helping them to report it to the right people, to the medical professionals, to others, because the ability to collect this kind of contemporaneous evidence is critical in building that case that, somebody acted in self-defense or out of desperation. And I think it's one of the things that's really missing. Frontline advocates must help women report and document domestic abuse and coercive control. It's a small thing, but it can make a difference when it gets to this stage, and the need to show, you know, beyond reasonable doubt that you're a victim of domestic abuse.
Thank you. And another question over here.
I was really interested in Pragna when you talked about wanting to bring cultural evidence into the courts. If you had the Law Commission in the palm of your hand, what would you ask them to change? And are there other jurisdictions where the things that you want are happening?
Thank you.
Yes, there are in some small ways in places like Australia, Canada, New Zealand, you know, they're having these same discussions. The idea of a social entrapment model has actually come from one of those countries in New Zealand. Yeah, in New Zealand. I actually think that the way to bring in all of this evidence is through that model. I think I like the simplicity of it. I like the fact that it shifts the focus onto structural barriers that women face, and that includes bringing in cultural evidence. You know, I'm not in favor of anything that says cultural competency. I'm interested in understandings of gendered understandings of culture. The reason I say that is if you just say that they need to be culturally competent, they can get anyone in the community standing up and saying, I can be the expert. Yeah. And often they're the patriarchs. Yeah. They're the very people who put the obstacles there in the first place to reporting domestic abuse or keeping women in domestic abuse. So we have to, you know, ensure that actually we bring that evidence in a very in a gendered way. The other thing is that intersectional understanding of domestic abuse, as a, you know, within the context of culture, socioeconomic conditions and so on, is something that needs to be understood across all the professions. So even if there is psychiatric evidence that you're presenting, that psychiatric evidence also needs to understand the socio-cultural background of the person and be able to bring that into their understanding of even the psychological or psychiatric impact. So I think these are the things I would say to the Law Commission.
Harriet, did you want to add anything about what you would say to the Law Commission? Where do you start?
Yes, I think that's the problem, is where do we start? Yeah, I mean, we're going to just give them as much kind of concise evidence as we can about why things have got to change. I think their remit is a bit limited to legislative reform, and there are kind of reforms that we need beyond legislation. I mean, as you've seen, if you've got a good law but no one understands the context, that's not much use. So we'll be putting forward a lot of evidence. We're also, I'm working quite hard to kind of bring together the voices of the bereaved families of women who've been murdered, to try and because we can be pitted against each other, because one lot are trying to push for longer sentences and recognition of murder, and the other, we're trying to say, well, hang on a minute, what's the implications? But I think we're both singing from the same hymn sheet. They're two sides of the same coin, and your daughter that was murdered could have survived if she managed, if she'd been, had picked up the knife at that point, and now she'd be in prison for murder. So it's sort of seeing that that's part of the same picture.
But one other thing I want to bring up is, as women, we talk about how we prepare for and we deal with male violence. There are some men in the room. Many of us are in relationships with men, or there are men in our lives. We have fathers and maybe brothers and sons. Any thoughts on what we can do in our small individual ways to try and help change the conversation? Because it feels so often it's women picking up the pieces after something's gone horribly wrong, and men are somehow left out of the equation, other than the person who was attacking that individual. How do we tackle that the patriarchy? Sorry, yeah, that's my question. You want to have a go? Come on, Pragna. You've got an answer.
I don't know where to start with that. We're doing all the things we're doing to tackle patriarchy, but I think we do need men as allies. We do. We absolutely do. And I don't think that I wasn't struck by that as much as I was until that moment when women in Afghanistan, who are living in probably the most worst kind of patriarchal situation that you could imagine, And the only way that they are ever going to be able to overcome that situation is if the men support them. Really, those men need to support them, because that's the only way you can overthrow the Taliban and what's going on there. And so I also think here we do need wider cultural campaigns to change the cultural dial. And to, you know, back in the 80s, 90s, we had zero tolerance campaigns. We need those kinds of campaigns back again, as well as much work to be done in schools, in classrooms, to tackle misogyny and to really tackle that inequalities that we exist, and those spaces have also shrunk.
Harriet.
Yeah, I mean, I think the sad fact is that male voices are listened to more, but we saw David Challen working with us in the Sally Challen campaign. It was incredibly valuable to have his voice there. Even if the media sort of always want to go to him, but I mean, he was also a family member. But and he's since become a real passionate campaigner around violence against women. Interestingly, and we saw the father of Lee Rose, speaking out, and that was a powerful voice. And we do, where there are male members who are able to speak in certain circumstances, it can be very, very useful. I mean, I think we still, we just need to not let them take over the campaigns, but to harness the reality, which is that men are listened to more, unfortunately.
Well, I think we're going to more or less wrap, but if there's a final thought you'd like to say, or a final reminder or a call to action. Oh, sorry, this one gone. Let's come pick a couple more questions then. Where's the microphone right now? Yep. Yes, right. Let's go for the person in the purple shirt there. Yes. And then we'll go further back. People haven't asked a question before. That's okay.
I wanted to ask if, in terms of the future of the campaign, if there is not a role for local groups, as there was for Justice for Women working together in local groups can not only provide support for women in their local prisons who are going out their tiny minds, but they can also help raise funds. What do you think about that?
Harriet? Yeah. And thank you. Can we just take that question over here, actually? Just the lady in the striped top. That'll be our last question. Yes, sorry, go ahead.
Absolutely. I think, why not? Let's return to some of the models that worked so well in the past. And yeah, because women are in prisons all over the country, and some of them will really want visits, and also when we're trying to gather together the information, when somebody contacts us at the beginning. So I think local groups, great, and helping, getting together to raise money and to campaign locally. I mean, also in terms of the media, the local news will often be very interested in a story. So, if you're in wherever you are, if it's, different areas where there's a case, yeah, great idea.
Thank you. And the final question here.
Just a quick one. You mentioned about zero tolerance campaigns, and I've noticed that they only seem to apply to certain situations. And am I right in thinking that misogyny is still not a hate crime, and that something needs to change in that respect?
It's interesting, you have zero tolerance campaigns on the tube, don't you, for things like staring, apparently zero tolerance, and sexual harassment and unwanted touching, which it's a start, but what are your thoughts on the zero tolerance idea?
I think it's one of many measures that you have to take. It's not on its own going to solve the problem, but it's, at least you're having these discussions in public, and just not being silent about it is important. Whether violence against women should be a hate crime, I'm not sure. I don't think so. Patriarchy is a system, and hate crimes individualize, the violence that women face. So I actually think we've got to come back to our analysis of patriarchy as a system of supremacy and power, rather than talk about violence against women as an individual hate crime.
So interesting. Harriet, final word to you.
Yeah, I think we've gone a bit mad with hate crimes here, and we've seen how they're misused in so many different ways. And so I don't think, I agree with Pragna, I don't think that's the way forward. and actually all forms of violence against women are hate crimes. I mean, that's the reality, and what they need to do is focus on actually, stopping those crimes that actually exist on the statute book already.
Well, thank you. Through your campaign, at least we can all make a contribution in some way to trying to turn this around. So thank you all for your time. Thank you to Harriet and Patel.